Publishing in top tier journals, you have to be patient, you have to be willing. The key motivation of an editor is to accept a paper that will bring more visibility to his or her journal.
What is the right time to submit their paper?
I have seen over the years this perception among Indian researchers that their data is not valued by reviewers and editors because there is a lack of organized or systematic approach to recruit postdoctoral fellows. The burden is on the candidate to find the right person.
What are the top mistakes which applicants make?
If you are approaching me to become a part of an existing ongoing project without bringing any new ideas or contributions, then that's not going to work. Teaching is important, but it's not as important as research. What you think is the right approach is not the only right approach.
Hello and welcome to Decoding Ph.D. Today, we are privileged to host Dr. Arun Upadhyay, an eminent researcher in finance and corporate governance. Dr. Upadhyay currently serves as a professor of finance and holds the prestigious Knight Ridder Eminent Scholar Endowment Chair at Florida International University. Dr. Upadhyay's academic journey is truly remarkable. He earned his Ph.D. in finance from Temple University, Philadelphia, and an MBA in finance, risk management, and insurance from Georgia State University, Atlanta. Before his current role, he held faculty positions as an associate professor of finance at the University of Nevada and the University of Alaska, Anchorage. Dr. Upadhyay has made significant contributions to academia through his publications in top-tier journals. His work has appeared in globally recognized FT50 journals such as the Journal of International Business Studies, the Journal of Financial and Quantitative Analysis, the Accounting Review, Strategic Management Journal, and the Human Resource Management. He also frequently contributes to the Journal of Corporate Finance. His research spans crucial areas including corporate governance, diversity in boardrooms, and risk management, influencing both academic and practical domains. Beyond his research, Dr. Upadhyay has been a recipient of numerous prestigious awards, including Best Paper Honors at international finance conferences. His extensive professional experience in corporate finance and banking further enriches his expertise. Additionally, he is a dedicated mentor, actively guiding students and early career researchers worldwide. In today's episode, we'll explore Dr. Upadhyay's invaluable insights on publishing in high-ranking journals, securing international and academic opportunities, and building a strong research profile. Let's welcome Dr. Arun Upadhyay.
Thank you, Sanchit.
Professor, first of all, thank you so much for taking out time from a busy schedule and joining us here.
Of course.
Sure, our audience would be greatly benefited from all your insights. And while we were discussing offline with some of the participants that you would be our next guest, people were really excited to hear from you.
Oh, thank you. Hope I'm really passionate about this career. And frankly speaking, when I was thinking about pursuing PhD, I wasn't sure whether I would really be into this career for a long period of time. But here I am, I graduated in 2007 and this is my 18th year teaching and doing research. And I truly believe that it's a noble profession, and even if we could motivate just one student to do the right thing, I believe it's worth doing it. So I hope, the future generation of academics and researchers will enjoy this conversation and will be motivated to pursue this academic career.
Definitely, Professor, I'm sure. So, Professor, you mentioned that when you started your PhD journey. So, let's go back to that and understand a bit more on how you transitioned from corporate. As I understand, you were previously working in the banking industry.
Right.
What led you to move to a PhD and an academic career at that?
Right, yeah. So, it's very interesting because my undergraduate degree was in engineering. And as you were aware, I graduated a period when private sector was not playing, a major role in Indian economy. So I wasn't very happy with the private sector jobs that I was getting after my undergraduate degree, right? So I took this exam for State Bank Probationary Officer's position. And I joined as Probationary Officer, worked in banking for quite some time. State Bank actually did an amazing job in training us in different aspects of banking. And I was working in the area of credit analysis, credit management, international banking. Oftentimes, I was dealing with all these manuals that somebody had prepared. Right? I was evaluating, for example, credit proposals using this framework that was provided by the central office of the bank. So at some point, I was curious to know what goes behind these policies and these manuals. So I decided to get an MBA, hoping that it will teach me, something about these things. The other thing that I was motivated by, which eventually shaped my research interest, was this incentive system or lack thereof in Indian banking system. And I really truly wanted to know what are the factors that motivate people to work hard, and what are the things that affect their career and career choices. So anyway, so I went to US to get an MBA degree. I finished my MBA in 15 months, but didn't learn anything new. I was still curious. So I met one of the Indian professor, and he suggested me to pursue a PhD. I was hesitant initially. I thought, I'm going to go back to India and maybe pursue a corporate career. Came back to India, interviewed with some banks, some insurance companies, but I think that I had that bug in my mind. Maybe I should explore this PhD option. So I joined PhD, not very sure, but my first seminar course was on corporate finance, and the professor who was teaching that seminar was Professor David Reeve, who eventually became my advisor. And the first thing that we discussed was, the incentive systems and understanding the governance structure. And I was blown by the amount of research that has been done in this area, and how here in India we really did not know about all that stuff. Or maybe people who were doing research, they knew it, but that research was never translated into
the industry.
In industry. So anyway, I started enjoying my those seminars. And then eventually, David became my advisor. I started working on this corporate governance topic. This was the time when U.S. was dealing with Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and a lot of changes were being brought into the corporate boardrooms. So that got my attention, and I started working on those topics. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing research. I still enjoy it. I started teaching, loved teaching. That's how my academic journey began. So I'm pretty happy that I took the advice of this professor, started my journey into academic career.
Wonderful, Professor. Quite an interesting journey. So what began with the curiosity eventually has translated to where you are today at such a great level, inspiring so many students and scholars.
Right. Yeah, and like I said, oftentimes we make choices, I would say, as Indian youth, that are not, and it's not just Indian youth in general. I mean, that these choices are not informed by our preferences or likings or dislikings. But as long as you are willing to change yourself based on what you like, I think it's worth exploring different things before arriving at the right choice that suits you.
So you have a lot of top tier publications, several FT50 publications. So our audience, and including me, we are very curious to know what strategies have worked for you so far in getting these great publications.
So there is this strategy component, but there is also being patient and persevere in terms of your pursuit of what you want to do with your research idea. Most ideas, they start from being simple, straightforward research questions. Typically, these questions, they arise as either you are reading some research paper, or you are working on some research idea, or you read something in newspapers, and you get curious about what does, for example, the data tell you. A lot of times, newspapers, they will focus on some story which may not be scientifically sound or scientifically studied, may not be supported by the data. So you kind of become curious about understanding more scientifically about that research question. So publishing in top tier journals, I guess, one, you have to be patient. You have to be willing to continuously refine your idea, change your strategies, write and rewrite the idea and the research in a way that attracts the attention of, let's say, editors and reviewers of these journals. Just take your time. Do not kind of rush into publishing right away or getting the expected decision right away, right? So just being patient, willing to revise and change your ideas based on what feedback you get from the reviewers, from your friends, your colleagues, presenting papers in different seminars, conferences, getting feedbacks. And like I said, it all starts from simple ideas. But as you work through that idea, it improves. You add more stuff, make it more comprehensive, and you prepare it for a top tier journal.
Speaking of reviewers and editors, so what are the expectations of reviewers and editors in these top journals? What do they expect from a paper?
So here's the thing. I mean, you have to think about the motivation of reviewers and editors, right? So the key motivation of an editor is to accept a paper that will bring more visibility to his or her journal. And that happens when the paper gets, lots of citation. So the editor is looking for a paper that will either bring a new idea, totally novel idea, which would be interesting to the audience of that journal. So new data, new angle to an idea that has already been tested, a question that has already been explored. So, for example, we both work in the area of finance, right? I mean, corporate finance, capital structure theories. I mean, there is so much that has been written about capital structure theories. But if you look at the data or choices that companies were making or actions that were, the kind of actions that investors valued, now those things have changed. So it may not be a bad idea to revisit those theories with the new data, maybe data from a different context. Maybe testing those theories using not just the novel data, but novel approach, novel instrument. That could be something that good journals might be willing to look at. So, like I said, it could be an existing question, but if you have new idea, new data, novel approach, those are all the things that editors and reviewers are looking for. Having said that, the paper also should be written nicely. The story should be presented nicely. The flow of your thoughts, your ideas, it should be smooth. Those are also important ingredients. I mean, I work in the area of empirical corporate finance. Oftentimes, having a nice instrument gets attention of reviewers and editors. Anything that brings novelty to your work will get attention from the top journals, reviewers and their reviewers and editors. Sure.
I actually have two follow-ups from that. So I think one of the challenge Indian researchers, specifically early stage researchers, face is what is the right time to submit their paper. So we have worked on a research idea, we've converted it to a paper, there is literature, there is analysis, there is writing.
Right.
But what is the time when we can finally say, okay, now it is ready to go out?
Right. So here is the thing, sometimes what happens is that, and I guess you learn it by making mistakes, so to speak, right? When you are young, when you are a new researcher, you think that you have found a great idea and you are in a hurry to send it to a journal, get feedback, maybe get positive feedback and get it published. But you probably are unable to catch major flaws because you have read a paper, because you have done your work thoroughly, you have revised that manuscript 100 times. Sometimes you are blinded to those major omissions. You just don't catch them. So even though it might seem to you that your paper is ready to be sent out, I think it's a good idea to send it to some co-authors, some friends, and to present in some seminars, in some conferences, get some feedbacks. I mean, I can tell you that even the top tier publications, the papers that have been cited thousands of times, if you read those papers, you can easily find some flaws in those papers, right? I think the best way to figure out whether it's ready for submission is to get as much feedback as possible. Now, having said that, I'm not suggesting that you wait for 10 years before submitting that paper. If you have some gotten feedback from, let's say, 5, 6, 8, 10 researchers who understand that research question, who are from that field, and if they like it, then then you will know that now is the time to submit it. But definitely get feedback from few researchers before sending it out.
That answers a very big question a lot of us have here. So it's too interesting. Also, the other part you mentioned is the writing and the structuring of the paper. So if you could throw some light on what is a good practice and what are the things which we should follow.
Right. So one thing that I would advise is that be aware of making overclaims and using very strong, language. Of course, if you are finding something, then you are finding, something, right? But I'm sure that there are people who might find something that does not support your finding, right? You may have missed something, you may have used a methodology. If you're working on an empirical study, you may have used a methodology that is generating this result. The result may be extremely robust, but somewhere somebody might find something else because they are using different sample. So what I'm trying to say is that be modest about your findings. Don't overclaim. Try to avoid that mistake, and try to present different aspects of that relationship. So is it possible that the relationship is driven by something else? Is it possible that what you are capturing is basically proxying for something else? Is there a possibility that there is alternative explanation? So look at different angles, explore whether the results are robust or not. Look at your assumptions, look at alternative explanations. And then also when you are presenting your findings, make sure to connect that with the existing literature and show how it contributes to existing literature. Acknowledge what has been done and what is the new angle that this study has brought. So again, simple things, but sometimes people just don't pay attention to these things.
That's again very insightful. I'm just wondering, based on all this, how else can a student in India make their research more appealing to an international audience, specifically working with Indian data?
Right. There is a perception, I would say misperception, among Indian researchers that Western outlets, some of the most reputable journals, they are published by companies outside of India. So I have seen over the years this perception among Indian researchers that their data is not valued by reviewers and editors of these journals. There may be some bias, for sure. We are all human beings, and we all have our biases. So some people may be biased against Indian data, but I don't think there is any denial that India still has rule of law. Systems work here more or less. The responses may be delayed, but still we have a democratic system, and we have an independent judiciary. India has one of the largest economies, and whatever is being produced in India is not subpar, not always subpar. Most people do understand this, so they are willing to give Indian data, Indian researchers another chance, no doubt about that. But what I have seen also is that a lot of the times these papers are written in a very journalistic way. So they will take maybe one side of the story and try to publish that story without giving a robust analysis.
Right.
Obviously, that is not going to be acceptable by these top journals. So academic journals are different from, let's say, newspapers, right? So you're not writing for a newspaper. You're not trying to make a sensational discovery. Do not sensationalize it. So I have reviewed papers for top tier journals written by, I don't know whether these were Indian writers or not, but writers who used Indian data. But most of the time, what I see is a paper written for a newspaper, not for a journal. So obviously, those papers get rejected. But I can tell you that recent changes in Indian economy have drawn a lot of attention from researchers overseas, from journals, top tier journals. They are publishing. Indian researchers are publishing using Indian data in top tier journals. And the other thing is that, we have a large population. A lot of researchers are submitting these manuscripts to these journals. Top tier journals, they have only limited space. So obviously, we are not going to get as much space as we would like to. But I think there is a growing interest in Indian data, Indian researchers. And hopefully, it will just continue growing.
That's a very positive note to look at, and I think that will encourage a lot of our Indian scholars to publish and to apply for such journals.
Yeah, I mean, so I think Indian economy is like a laboratory, right? A lot of things are happening. You just have to spin the right story, right angle. So what is good for, let's say, US economy may not be good for Indian economy. But if Indian regulators are following the same approach that US regulators have, just look at that and see if it's working in India or not. Try to see what is the reason why it's not working. That will get good attention from the reviewers and editors.
So, Professor, one aspect I understood from this was what perhaps some other scholars also refer to as tension in the hypothesis. So, not to look at only one side of the story. But I think one potential concern is if this is a potential concern from Indian scholars specifically, that it may undermine the research that they're doing if they focus too much on the attention. So how much truth do you think?
I don't believe in that. I mean, so we have to understand the fundamental of doing research. What is the research question? If there is no alternative explanation to that question, then it's not a research question, right? I mean, it's a truth. There is nothing to explore about that question. Right. So you have to look at the alternative, the other side of the story. That is what makes research an interesting research, makes a question as interesting research question. Right. So I don't think, there is any reason to be worried about this part. It's perfectly fine to show that tension in that research question and explore both sides, see which hypothesis is supported by the data.
Right. So, moving on to the career progression aspect. So, Indian scholars also prefer looking at postdoc opportunities in international universities to add on to their CVs. So, what are the qualities that these universities are typically looking for when they recruit for postdoc positions?
Okay, so the number one thing that most universities look for is the potential for doing good quality research and the potential for collaboration on different topics. If you have the right research question that somebody is interested in a specific department, then that department would be interested or will be willing to offer you a post. So the biggest problem is that in a business school or in finance departments, I mean, the culture of postdoc just did not exist, let's say, a few years ago in the US. Right. But then, because of the lack of enough academically trained researchers and teachers, some universities started offering these postdoctoral opportunities to those, newly graduated PhDs who may want to build, a solid research. Again, that is going to happen only if you could find a department which has multiple people working in the same area that you are working in. And then, of course, your own research. It should be at advanced stage, should be interesting. You should have a good set of data and stuff like that. That should get attention of those departments that offer postdoctoral career tracks. But again, I mean, still very few universities do that. Only top tier universities are doing that. Just few of them. The other thing is to maybe approach directly to a person who may be working in the same area and seeing if there is possibility of collaborating with that person while working as postdoctoral fellow in that department. So that doesn't hurt. But yeah, what I have seen is that very few departments have these openings or a systematic way of recruiting postdoctoral fellows in finance, for that matter in any business departments.
My understanding in this case is that the focus has to be on the research topic or research question rather than looking at which school should I apply for. You should look at which school entertains or looks at this topic more interestingly, or where are the faculty members who work on this area.
Right. Yeah, because research is something that people do regardless of what their departments are doing, right? Oftentimes, people for various reasons might stay in a department where others are not working in that area. So I think it's better to find the right person than the right department. I mean, there are some departments where there is a culture. For example, there are finance departments that primarily will focus on banking. Multiple people will be working in the area of banking. So if you are interested in doing research, conducting, analyzing a research question related to banking, I mean, that kind of department would be ideal. Find someone who is working in that particular area that you are interested in, and see if they will be willing to accept you as a postdoctoral fellow. It's actually it's a very nice system. Getting postdoctoral training is good for the host department as well as a postdoctoral candidate. If there are matching interests, if the interests of both parties match, I'm sure people would be willing to consider that request.
A follow-up question from that, Professor: how does a student or a candidate, even after graduating, how do they network in such a way that they are able to connect with these professors in such big universities and to obtain these kind of positions, either for postdoc or for academic jobs? How does that networking game work?
I think that is something that is very important. Yet there is always this hesitation among the new graduates about how to approach a professor or senior professor. But what I have seen is that most people are very helpful because they have gone through that stage, right? So they are willing to help the new generation of researchers. But again, I hate to say this, but because there is a lack of organized or systematic approach to recruit postdoctoral fellows, the burden is on the candidate to find the right person. So you have to show that initiative. You have to take that step first, approach that researcher, and just be persistent. Give that researcher a chance. Write or call, once, twice, 3 times. The best way to approach the researcher is in these conferences. Right. That's the best time to do the networking. So if you find someone and if you happen to be in the same conference, just make sure to get that person's attention and talk to this person. Your advisor, somebody on your committee, may be able to introduce you to that person. There is no simple way. I guess someone has to take this initiative, and mostly it is the candidate who has to take that initiative. In other fields, for example, in basic sciences, medical field, engineering field, the culture of postdoc is more prevalent, and there is a systematic approach to recruiting postdoctoral fellows. They will put advertisement in academic newspapers for these positions. That's not the case, unfortunately, in business schools. So networking, I guess, maybe in conferences, that's probably the best approach.
So Professor, you may also be receiving a lot of these kind of applications and requests from students. So I would like to also understand what are the top mistakes which applicants make, which which kind of get these applications rejected.
So here's the thing. When I look at these applications or requests or emails, most of the time I can figure out which ones are serious enough and which ones are not that serious, right? if you are approaching me to become a part of an existing ongoing project without bringing any new ideas or contributions, then that's not going to work, right? Because there are people who have already put in enough effort. So when you approach somebody, have something concrete to say, have a proposal that will be attractive. Of course, it has to be attractive to you in the first place,
right,
but it has to be attractive to the next person as well. Now, how do you know whether it will be attractive or not? That is based on that person's research interest. So, for example, if somebody approaches me with an idea, if you told me that you have this novel data, this is the research question that you are thinking about exploring, you would like to maybe collaborate, meet, apply for postdoc, I would find that interesting. But if you approach me, saying something like, I would be happy to be part of your research team, or I would like to join a research idea, or any idea, to me that's very vague.
right,
I would probably not even give any attention to those kind of requests. So it's very simple, right? I mean, first of all, when you approach that person, you have to have something concrete to kind of talk about, right? But if you have met someone in a conference, if you have been able to kind of get his or her attention, and then if you are approaching that person with with a concrete idea, there is absolutely no reason for that person to say no. And if that person ignores your email, then it's best to just avoid that person and move on to. It's as simple as that.
That's very, very helpful actually. So approaching with some concrete results and a broad outline of what you are looking at as a research problem is what is helpful.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
So, Professor, moving on to the job opportunities aspect. So, postdoc is one aspect. The other is when we are looking as faculty positions. We're looking for faculty positions outside.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do the dynamics play out there? So, say US versus Europe or versus Indian context.
Right.
So, what is the institutional cultural differences that play out?
The thing is that in US particularly, they are not going to look at the application of a fresh PhD from, let's say, from India, unless this person has a solid publication record in hand. So if you have already published, let's say, top tier, and I don't mean to say, Journal of Finance, decent, Journal of Corporate Finance or JBF or something like that, then you will get attention from these departments. In US, broadly speaking, you can categorize departments in, let's say, you can put them in 4 different buckets. So you have top tier departments, right? Top 15, 20. Then you have next, 30, 40, 50 departments. Then you have the third tier. And then you have these teaching schools. So even the teaching schools in India, they would probably not consider an application from Indian, graduate, unless the application shows some credible research output. The other top tier schools, they will be looking for maybe high quality publication before they would consider an application from. And I'm not talking about just India. I'm talking about non-US graduates in general. But if you have a good research pipeline and a couple of good, at least one good paper, then they will be willing to give you a chance.
What role does teaching versus research dynamics play? So having some teaching experience, does it matter or it's not as important in the early stages?
You'd have to think about the particular department that you're looking at. What are their priorities? So like I said, there are some pure teaching schools. The research requirement in those schools is minimal. They will be happy if instructors have some publications. So they will be looking at teaching portfolio, whether you can handle large classes, diverse classes, whether you can handle different kinds of courses and stuff like that. Research is more important if you are applying to the other 3 categories of institutions. Those departments that are balanced departments, they will be looking at your research portfolio more carefully than the teaching. And then those who prioritize research, obviously they are going to look at your research record. If you have a solid publication in hand, that would be amazing. But if you have some solid ideas, solid papers, working papers, then they will give you an attention. But yeah, they will be looking at your research. Teaching is important, but it's not as important as research.
So it also depends on school you're applying for, but in general, the research aspect is far more important.
Definitely, yeah.
The next question is about early career researchers. How do they understand what is happening in the literature? How do they stay updated with the new trends that are emerging? For instance, by the time a paper is out, it has already been like say 2 years since the submission or 1.5 years since submission.
Right.
So it's already old now.
Right,
and what people are currently working on is much different from what is published now. So how do they stay updated?
Yeah, so whatever we researchers do is also the reflection of what society is dealing with, right? So you can get a feeling of what is getting importance by looking at, for example, newspapers, policy debates, conference themes. I mean, what are they talking about? But mostly the things that concern the industry, ordinary citizens. What are the questions that common person is dealing with? It's as simple as that. So to give you an example, in 2000, when I was in PhD program, seemed like board reform is the biggest thing. So I started working on that. Then came 2008 financial crisis. Everybody was working on that because that became the most important, most pressing issue. Banking reforms, housing market reforms, and then the question of gender inequality, and then came the Paris Agreement. The climate change. So now, the last 2 years, I think majority of the sessions in AFA or NFA or FMA were focused on ESG. Before that, it was gender diversity, corporate boards, board of directors, compensation. So these are all the reflections of what society is dealing with. So just look at that. I guess that will guide you about what is the most important question that society is dealing with. Now, there are some first movers. Obviously, not everybody can compete with them. So if you look at, for example, climate finance type research, people like Laura Starks, she started talking about climate change and how the investors are dealing with climate change way back in 2015, 2016. She probably got access to some data way back in 2015, 2016 before everybody else got access to that data. I mean, I remember when I was thinking about doing a paper on the corporate boards, I was trying to find a source for data, and suddenly I realized that some people have already published papers on this. In fact, to tell you this interesting story, that when I was writing my thesis, I was, like everybody else, I was working on 3 papers. I wrote my thesis, gave it to my advisor. Then my advisor told me that once he evaluated all the papers, of course I was working with him, I was showing everything consistently, but maybe a month after I gave my thesis to him, he told me that one of the ideas has already been published by somebody in a top tier journal. And I felt like, I was numb, because basically the message was that I would have to write a new chapter, as part of my thesis. So things move really fast in academia. And it's hard to be, let's say, the first one to work in a particular area which is getting attention. But if you're looking at what is being debated at public policy forums and among newspapers and among policymakers, you can get a good sense of what is the right research question for this time period. That field may stay attractive for 3 to 5 years at max, and within those 3 to 5 years, probably few hundred papers would be written and published on those topics, looking at different aspects of those questions. And thereafter, all the follow-on papers, they would simply be extending or adding some minor angles to those research questions. But just researchers move on to the next research question after 3 to 5 years. It doesn't mean that the question is dead, but getting attention of serious researchers, top-tier journals on those topics becomes difficult. So right now, everybody is talking about climate finance, some sort of ESG. I guess the attention has now shifted from governance, pure governance, to more on environmental finance, environmental change, and how it will be dealt with by the markets. A few years ago, gender diversity among, for example, top executives and corporate board members was a top issue. But if you look at the latest surveys of what are the most pressing concerns for the board members and CEOs and CFOs, gender diversity is not even one of the top 10 issues. So just keeping track of what is the debate that public is having, policymakers are having, newspapers, media outlets. That will give you a good idea of what is the right research question.
Too many things covered in this. I have multiple follow-up questions again. So first one, you mentioned data being a challenge here. So how do we get access to data? So one is, of course, there are these standardized data sets.
Right.
But we often observe that most of those variables have been exhausted in all possible combinations in terms of interesting research questions. So other than that, what is a good way to get data, perhaps approach industry, or are there some other ways which we can look at?
So number one, obviously these scanned data sets, everybody has access to them, overused, but you can still find interesting variables, interesting data points, or you can still be able to answer a good research question using those data sets if you know those data sets really well. So first of all, you have to build a good expertise on that issue before you could use an existing data set, a canned data set. Other than that, these days, there are newer technologies that are available for you to extract data, like artificial intelligence, machine learning, right? You can do a lot of things by using machine learning approaches or, with the help of artificial intelligence. So that is something that is being exploited as of now. I think it's now high time for social science researchers, researchers in business areas to collaborate with people from other fields, maybe engineering, maybe basic sciences. So, for example, I have written a couple of grant proposals. One of them was recently funded by this US agency called National Science Foundation. Actually, it's $1 million grant.
Wow.
But I'm working with people from maths, people from earth and environmental sciences, from different departments. And we are trying to address this research question, which may seem like a very finance-centric question. But everybody is interested in understanding how the markets are going to react to these things. So these researchers from math and earth and environmental sciences and law and public policy, they are interested in the same question. Let's say the variables that they are using may be different, but we found a common interest. We wrote this proposal, and the proposal, has been accepted to be funded by one of these major funding agencies. Now the good thing to me is that I'm learning from these other areas, people from these other areas, and they are learning from me, what are the variables that we use, what are the interests of financial markets, how financial markets operate, stuff like that. I interact with this top researcher from earth and environmental sciences, but this person did not have any clue about the basic functioning of financial markets, did have no clue about the role of boards or role of SEC, regulatory bodies. So it's just that we all work in silos. We hardly communicate with each other, but there is so much to learn by working with others. And we can create our own unique data set by collaborating with people from other areas. So I think that's another approach to get new data set.
First of all, Professor, congratulations for the grant.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's my first grant too. I never had any grant in my life. Something that I'm really very happy about. So now I'm kind of very excited about this thing. So I'm working on, like I said, another grant with a group of researchers, and I'm trying to kind of collaborate with people from computer science and computer engineering, trying to get their help, kind of extract information from financial reports and other stuff, right? So those are some of the ways that that one can access newer data sets or newer variables.
This is multidisciplinary in the truest sense of the word.
Yes.
As multidisciplinary as
I
it can
really
get.
enjoy that kind of work. I mean, I'm a firm believer in that we all, all the researchers, they do bring something unique, something important to the table. I mean, it doesn't mean that they don't know our finance theories or our empirical methodologies. As an empirical corporate finance researcher, I'm always dealing with this question of endogeneity. But when I work with people from management, they also are worried about endogeneity, establishing causality. But what I find interesting about those researchers is that they are interested in telling the right story. Even though we think that we are establishing causality by using this, this approach or that approach. But hey, I don't think we can say that this is a true causal relationship that we have found. I really enjoy, working with people from other disciplines.
So, Professor, another aspect you mentioned was adding on to the existing research. So, as early career researchers, how much of innovation and rigor, how do we balance that? How much of innovation versus how much of rigor do we need to incorporate in our research?
So, you mean the existing research, the research questions that have already been addressed?
Adding to the broad, so for instance, we discussed climate finance as a emerging topic. So if somebody is starting on a climate finance paper today, starting on working on a new paper today, so a lot of literature is already out there in top journals.
Right.
So if somebody is starting out today, how much of innovation is required in that and how much rigor is required? For instance, do we require new variables? Do we require new perspectives to look at the same question? How should that be balanced?
Right. So like it happens with any new field, right? Even with mature fields. We were talking about capital structure in the beginning, right? I mean, it has been studied so much that it seems like there is not much to learn about. We know almost everything about capital structure, but you still see papers on capital structure. I mean, people still publish papers on capital structure. So you just have to find right angle. You have to maybe bring a new angle to that question that would be guided by maybe some societal changes, maybe some regulatory changes. Maybe, just the changing preferences of consumers. For example, one of the papers that we are working on is, it looks at negative interest rate. Typical capital structure papers, they don't even consider the idea of negative interest rate. But we have seen multiple instances where interest rate policy rates did go below zero. So how would that be explained by the existing capital structure theories, or whether the empirical studies on capital structure incorporate that possibility, or can we test something? So what I'm trying to say is that there is always a way to examine or re-examine the existing research questions in a new context.
Right.
That might be, like I said, it might be shaped by, for example, new preferences of consumers.
Right.
It's still possible to use the same data, same variables, but from a different angle.
Another question in this context is when we submit research papers, quite often we receive rejections. So how do we deal with rejections? How do we learn from them? And how do we move on?
It's just pure experience. I mean, initially when you are new in this game, it feels bad, right? I mean, nobody likes being rejected, right? I mean, always feels bad. Believe me, even after you have seen maybe 150 rejections, yes, it still feels bad, no doubt about that. But you kind of learn as you progress in your career. You learn that what you think is the right approach is not the only right approach, right? And as you also start reviewing others' work, you also understand the mistakes that you may be making when you are submitting your own paper, when you are writing your own paper. So you become sympathetic to those reviewers as well.
Right.
I mean, nobody thinks that they are writing a bad paper.
Right.
Every paper seems to be a good paper, but I'm pretty sure that papers that are being rejected, somebody is not interested in your story. I don't think the reviewers have, average reviewer, I don't think the average reviewer has any malice or has any bad intentions when they are rejecting a paper. It's just that they feel this burden that they have to prevent the field from being, let's say, becoming low quality field. So, like gatekeepers, they think of themselves as gatekeepers. But again, I mean, the best approach is to believe in that system, that the whole refereeing, reviewing process is designed to weed out good quality papers from poor quality papers. As simple as that. Now, some reviewers may have biases, but who knows? It's my own bias that tells me that this is the best paper, right? I mean, that I'm also biased, and just move on. Again, I mean, it's easy to say, but just don't feel bad. Take that with a pinch of salt and try to address those questions as much as you can, and move on. That's the best approach. I mean, I can't say that it doesn't feel bad. It feels bad always, but just take the reviewer's comment in good stride. Try to address them as much as possible, and send it to maybe next journal, another journal.
So, Professor, in your opinion, what are some of the areas in which Indian scholars can contribute, especially if somebody is starting a new research project today? So, what are some of the areas which Indian scholars can contribute to, specifically maybe in finance and accounting, or if you want to address the broader field in management?
So, I believe Indian society is changing quite a bit. New Indian consumers, their preferences are changing rapidly. The ambitions of average Indian changing rapidly. India is getting ready to play a major role on the global stage. At the same time, there are lots of legal changes occurring. So anything that tries to understand the implications of these changes from the finance or accounting angle would be very interesting. Whether the changing preferences of young Indians, investors, consumers, right? How is that shaping up the Indian economy? The choices that Indian companies are making, the choices that Indian managers are making. I think that would be very interesting. Then there are larger questions that are relevant for everybody, like climate change. So, being the most populated country on the earth, I think climate change is something that should be on the mind of every Indian, especially on the minds of Indian researchers. So, looking at climate change from different angles, it's possible that because of the lack of the data, the researchers may not be able to look at, for example, just to give you an example, the role of NGOs. But it doesn't mean that they don't play a good role. I think it's important to find the right angle, find the right research question, like what is the role of NGOs in shaping up the climate change or the costs and benefits of climate change policies in the context of non-for-profit entities or even for-profit entities, but from a different angle. Some sort of intersection of, let's say, the pressing questions that were important for, let's say, Western countries in early 2000s. Maybe those questions are still relevant in India. Think about gender diversity. I've written a number of papers on gender diversity on corporate boards. I think India has done a lot of regulatory work in that area. But has it helped Indian companies? There are a bunch of papers that have been written on this issue. But maybe just taking up one issue at a time, has it helped? And in what cases it has helped? If it did not help, why didn't it help? Was there any problem in the regulations, or was there something else that did not permit these regulations to benefit certain types of companies? So I think those are still relevant questions in the Indian context, especially because the regulatory changes that have happened in India are still new. Right. I think it's still time to kind of look at from pre-regulations to post-regulation, maybe looking at some major milestones 5 years after that. Did those regulations achieve their intended goals or not? So I think those are still very valid research questions.
Absolutely, Professor. So for our audience out there, now we have a lot of very, very interesting questions that we can work on, all thanks to Professor Arun. So, Professor, one last question before we finally call this super insightful session to an end. What would be one advice you would give to PhD students and early career researchers out there who are watching our show today?
Mhm. I think the best thing is to read as many papers as you can. Do as much reading as possible. Just read broadly. You don't have to limit yourself when you are reading these research papers. You don't have to limit to one particular area. For example, I'm interested in learning more about board dynamics, basically. But to understand that, first I have to understand, what is a board? What are the basics of a board? So I'm reading papers not only from the finance, but I'm reading papers from psychology. I'm reading papers from sociology, from economics, from management, trying to understand the group dynamics within the board. So I would suggest read as broadly as possible, and then find the right research question. Obviously, the research question is going to be very narrow, very specific, but if you have a broader understanding of research question, then you will be able to deal with that research question in a better way as compared with someone who is not aware of, let's say, how much work has been done and what is the conclusion of the work in other areas.
Right.
So just read as broadly as possible and read as much as possible. It does seem like superfluous because you feel like working on your data, on your own data, and trying to find something new. But it's not going to be as interesting as it would be if you had a better understanding of what exactly are you searching for.
It will also speed up the research work that you're trying to do.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So
Great
I think
advice,
that's the
Professor.
best thing that that one can do early on. Because once you start working with your on your own data, you probably may not even get time or chance to read those those papers.
Great, wonderful advice, Professor. I'm sure our viewers would be greatly benefited from all the super insightful conversations today. I am
I hope so.
learning a lot today.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much once again for.
Oh, definitely, Sanchit, anytime. And thank you. Thanks for inviting me to this wonderful program that you guys are doing. I think it's very helpful, very interesting, and like I said, and I hope it guides some younger folks to get interested in this field, in this career.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sanchit. It was really nice talking to you. Thanks.